Let's imagine a fairly common scenario where we want to add a new coffee into our database, but it has flavors that are not present in our flavors table just yet. Luckily, we have a few options we can do to handle this properly. We could manually insert all of these new flavors into the database and afterwards create a new coffee entity, but that's not ideal. A better option would be for us to do cascading inserts. To enable cascading for both inserts and updates, let's set the cascade property to true inside of our relations, such as the many-to-many relation we have between coffee and flavor. Note that if we want, we can also limit cascades to just insert or update as well. With this small addition, flavors that belong to a newly created coffee will be automatically inserted into the database for us. But to make this work, we still need to perform a few more updates to our code. If we look back at one of our DTOs we've made so far, they contain a flavors property, which is an array of strings. But we need to make sure we map these strings, which are names of flavors, to real entities, instances of a flavor entity. To do this, we'll first need to inject the flavor repository into our coffee service class. With this in place, let's define a new private method and call it preload flavor by name. In this method, we're taking a flavor name as an input argument and returning a promise that resolves to a real flavor entity. If a flavor with the specified name already exists in our database, we want to return it. Otherwise, this method creates a new class instance with the name we passed in. Now that we have this method, let's put it to good use in both our create and update methods. First, let's make a few tweaks to the create method. This method needs to loop through all the flavors in our create coffee DTO with the map function and call our new preload flavor by name method to make sure they're properly populated. Using await in combination with promise.all lets us wait until the entire array of promises finishes before executing further code. Once this code finishes executing, we'll have an array of flavor entities in our new flavors variable we just defined here. Now all we have to do is merge create coffee DTO with our updated flavor entities. We can easily do this by using the spread operator to get all of the properties of our create coffee DTO object, and then afterwards overriding the flavors property with our new populated flavors variable of the same name. You can see we're getting some errors here as the flavors type doesn't match. Let's fix this real quick. If we head over to our coffee entity, let's change the type of the flavors property to the type array of flavor, which going forward is what we'd always want to do when creating entity relations. With this in place, we can now go back to our coffee's create method. Now, all we need to do is call the save method for our new coffee, and that's it. Likewise, we must follow the same steps in our update method below. There's one difference here that we should point out. In our patch operation, the flavors property is optional. Let's make sure we add an inline condition here to make sure we actually have flavors before we call the map method on each one of them to preload it. If we didn't add this condition, we'd get an error if flavors was ever undefined. Now heading back to our coffee entity, since we have cascade set to true in our relation, any new flavors will be automatically added to the database together along with any coffees created, with everything and their relationships tied together. Let's fire up Insomnia and test some of these routes to make sure everything we did works. First, let's make a post request making sure we specified a flavors property in the request payload and hit send. Great, no errors. Now let's make a get/coffees request to see if these new flavors were properly populated in our database. Great, there we have it. We can see the new flavors were added into the database and even came back with this response.